This is Kilkenny.com. We are in the Clubhouse Hotel. Micheál Martin, leader of Fianna Fáil, welcome to Kilkenny.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. It's a great pleasure to be here in the sunny southeast.
Exactly, on very sunny
on a beautiful day.
Yeah. And Micheál, I suppose the first thing is, as a minister, congratulations, because a past minister that is, congratulations because you actually affected people's health with legislation with the smoking ban. Is that something you're proud of?
Yes, indeed, and it was a long journey at the time, and a lot of people at the time were not as happy as they have subsequently become. And indeed, everywhere I go, I meet people who just walk across the street and they may say, "I'm not your politics. I want to thank you for the smoking ban. It made such a difference to my life." And that could be people working in restaurants and pubs, in hotels, or people generally who may have family with asthmatic or chest conditions generally. All of them appreciate it, as well as the general public.
Yeah, it certainly was before its time, and it's adopted by Europe now. And so you were innovative, really.
I was at a time in health, and I was anxious to take on board issues like that and to get an outcome, which I think, as you say, ultimately, and it's over time you learn it more than even at the time, dramatically impacts on people's living environment and quality of life and health outcomes.
Absolutely, and congratulations. And that's definitely seen as a success. And I suppose just to get to know Micheál Martin, can you tell us, if you can share, your most painful public or private failure as such? You know, have you embraced failure? Have you seen failure in your own career or life?
Well, of course, in life in general, one has successes and one has, I suppose, areas that did not succeed as well. I mean, I remember my very first general election, 1987, I didn't win.
Yeah.
In terms of public policy, obviously, I think in terms of the last decade, I think we spent too much in government in terms of expenditure and reduced taxation levels very low at the time. Resulting in issues when the crash came.
And you were a minister in more than 4, was it?
Yeah, and of course I was in the Department of Education,
yes,
where I was pushing for expenditure to get things done in education, and we got them done. I mean,
Do you regret all of that expenditure?
Well, some of it. I mean, obviously, some of it is very positive. I mean, the motorways have been a tremendous legacy in terms of getting from A to B. Plus, education. I think we did dramatic achievements in education. We now have the highest participation levels in third level because of the expansion of third level at the time. And the big issue now for a lot of people that I meet is, can we get our kids through?
It's a huge issue for people. And
in terms of affordability, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when you were elected leader, you mentioned that you were excited about being leader of Fianna Fáil, obviously, but also it was a step up for you, joining Fianna Fáil and education. I remember that interview very clearly.
Yeah, I was born in Cork,
yes,
in Turner's Cross. I was educated in Closh Crease 3, Skull Crease 3, Closh Crease 3, which was organised by the Presentation Brothers. It was a school founded at the same time as the free education scheme came in the late 60s that Donogh O'Malley had initiated under Fianna Fáil. My father was a bus driver, working class family. Their main aim in life was to educate us. And so to a certain extent, that whole change in society from the late 60s to the early 70s, I was part of as a child, a young fellow growing up. And central to that was access to education. So I was the first of my family. We were the first generation of our family to go to second level even. And then I would have been the first to go to university in the entire family. And so to us, Fianna Fáil growing up was about that. It was about equality of opportunity, giving everybody in society, irrespective of background, a chance in life to make it in life. And we saw education as the key to unlock the door on a person's journey through life. And that has always stayed with me. And I've always been very grateful to my parents and indeed to Crease 3, where I went to school, for that opportunity, because without it, I certainly wouldn't have had the life that I've had.
And I note that you said it has stayed with you, which is quite remarkable, because you know you are part of the establishment party of Fianna Fáil, and I suppose that's why I ask about failure. And how do you feel you can empathise still with certain people who are ground down by debt, who worry about paying their mortgage, and people who have immigrated, largely due to that government that you're actually part of at one stage?
Yeah, I mean, I knock on doors. I've been knocking on doors for the last 3 years, hearing stories, listening to people, their individual stories, and I do get it where they're coming from.
Can you empathise with
Yes,
them?
absolutely. And I think there's not a family that hasn't been touched in some shape or form out in the housing estates that I call to, and I call to them all over across the country. And my dedication there, my commitment is, not to walk away from all of that, but to see what we can do and learn lessons from the past. Because I think one of the issues has been the collapse of the financial services, the banking collapse, which was one of the main catalysts for the global depression that has occurred in the last 6 or 7 years, and to make sure, and even now I'm not sure that the Oireachtas has still dealt with this, how you have somebody minding the regulators, guarding the guards, so to speak, in terms of the banking system, because you have an independent central bank that governs the banks, but I think you need a powerful parliamentary oversight to make sure that the regulators are doing their job as well.
And is the question there then, are the banks running the show?
I think they still are. I think the government has allowed them to run the show. I think it is. I think we have pointed out time and time again over the last 4 years, and Michael McGrath, spokesman in finance, has been very strong on this, that the banks have a veto over any mortgage arrears issues, for example, over any deal that would resolve mortgage arrears. And there's too many people now before the courts having their homes repossessed or in the process of having them repossessed.
Well, what will change
and what we're saying is we need to end the veto. Now, I was amazed last week to read that the government are now looking at diluting the veto, and we've been calling on them to do this for 4 years, and Enda Kenny has resisted it and Michael Noonan has resisted it. Now, we don't know what they're going to do in relation to that, in terms of are they serious or are they just doing it before an election like they did before the last general election. But really, we put forward legislation a month ago, 3 weeks ago now, saying simply that the government should allow the personal insolvency practitioners to come up with packages, and that the banks would have an obligation to accept those resolutions, or else to give very good reasons as to why they wouldn't. At the moment, there is no obligation on the banks at all to accept any reasonable package that may be brought forward on behalf of somebody who's in arrears. And then we have the rip-off of the variable, those on variable rate mortgages that Michael McGrath brought up again 2 weeks ago when Fianna Fáil tabled a motion. Again, the banks are ripping off many, many customers out there. And it's time for the government
how can you do, Micheál, besides proposing?
Well, we're in opposition.
No, you are, I appreciate
that. And we can only do so much in opposition.
Yes.
And I think by pressure we can change things. I mean, we did change the government's policy on discretionary medical cards. I spent 18 months in the Dáil raising it, individual cases, very sick children who lost their discretionary medical cards, adults, of course, as well. And it took the local elections, and in the aftermath of the local elections, we get a massive U-turn, and over 20,000 were restored. Yes. So that's the purpose of opposition, to hold government to account, to suggest there's another way forward, and to keep the pressure on. I think on the mortgages issues, we are seeing change, and we'll see further change because of the pressure we're bringing to bear on government.
I'm going to bring you back into the past for a moment. Your father, Paddy Martin, seemingly was an international amateur boxer. And he passed away only in 2012.
2 years ago, yeah.
What was that like, having a famous dad? I imagine it was...
Well, we were very fond of him. I'm very proud of my father in many respects, and he was a touchstone in my life in terms of advice and mentoring and all of that. We would listen to some of his colleagues. When I started electioneering first in my first local election in 1985, I had all my policies made out. But once I started knocking on doors in Ballinlough, I often tell the story that they weren't particularly interested in the leaflets. They just asked one question: "Are you the champ's son?" He was known as Paddy Champ Martin, and they would say then that they remember the Joe Bygraves fight. Bygraves was an international. He became a very famous British boxer afterwards. He fought Johansson, who fought Patterson for the world title, and all of that. And the father beat Bygraves in a 6 2-minute rounds in City Hall Cork tournament. Never, no. So, I mean, it was interesting. Now, when we grew up, boxing was dying on its feet in the 60s. Yes. It has now gone through a renaissance in Cork, and it's alive and well. Yes. And it's great to see it, because it gives young people great opportunities.
And I suppose what I want to ask you too, Micheál, and thank you for sharing that, is do you need to take the gloves off yourself with some parliamentary members locally and some councillors who have decided to find careers elsewhere?
Well, no, that's life. I mean, in terms of people who may take their decisions, I was disappointed, obviously, in the decision, but that can occur. And we have a very good candidate in Bobby Aylward. That's my focus. That's my singular focus. And I've been with John McGuinness and our councillors here, and we're all working together in terms of supporting Bobby's campaign. And there's no question other than that. And that is our singular focus now over the next number of weeks until we get to polling day. And I must say the Aylwards are very authentic people. They come from the soil. They've just had a great success recently with Ballyhale Shamrocks, great hurling country. And I noticed going around with Liam Aylward that he has a very solid record built up on the ground in many estates and in many communities across Kilkenny and Carlow. It's interesting that kind of feedback is coming back. And Bobby himself, very popular and very authentic and straight guy, and a very decent guy.
And Micheál, yourself, family life yourself, you've been visited with tragedy as well.
Well, we have, and I don't generally talk about it in terms of interviews, but we, have lost My son Rory back in 1999 with a cot death, and then 4 years ago Lena passed away, and they're devastating tragedies in the family, but we take every day as it comes though.
Yes, and that must be difficult at the same time to keep going.
It is, but we do our very best together as a family, and we work through it, and we continue to work through it. And we I have 3 other children who, thanks be to God, are a great blessing.
Micheál Martin, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.